Iran may be behaving badly. It hasn't been confirmed, but if it's confirmed, look, they know the consequences. Consequences will be very powerful, maybe more powerful than the last time.
این آزموده را آزمودن خطاست. در همه حمله هایی که قبلا کردید، در تمام تجاوزاتتون اولین کسی که درخواست آتش بس کرد شما بودید. حالا بار دیگر میخواد آزموده کنید، بفرمایید.
Welcome to Demystifying Iran. In the early 20th century, within the imagination of many Iranians, America had come to symbolize modernity, integrity, and their hope for an anti-colonial champion. Most did not know details of U.S. history, nor about the lands it had more recently and forcibly colonized, such as Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. They did not know about U.S. de facto control over countries like Cuba, Panama, Nicaragua, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, or Mexico. Meanwhile, in the cold calculus of geopolitics, America remained a largely disengaged power in Iran's immediate affairs. Its focus and imperial ambitions were directed elsewhere. Iranian hope and America's later aroused interest would prove fateful, setting the stage for the 1953 coup. In 1951, Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh, Iran's democratically elected prime minister, nationalized the country's oil, ending a decades-long British stranglehold. He believed this act of economic sovereignty could more easily succeed with its imagined anti-colonial friend. He turned to the United States for understanding and support. It was a fatal miscalculation. Mossadegh was unaware that in this arena, Britain and America were of one spirit. In London, nationalization was an outrage. In Washington, it was a major Cold War concern. Iran's move towards sovereignty was seen as a dangerous opening for Soviet influence, and so America prepared its decisive move, not to support Iranian sovereignty, but to undermine it. For decades, the full story was shrouded in denial and obscured by classified files. But through memoirs, leaks, and forced declassifications, a damning record has emerged. A record not from Iranian critics, but from the American operatives and internal histories of the CIA itself. The architect was Kermit Roosevelt, the CIA's man in Tehran. In his memoir, he details how the operational plan, codenamed Operation Ajax, was approved by the highest levels of the U.S. State Department and the CIA in June 1953. Their tactics were meticulous. A massive propaganda campaign to paint Mossadegh as a communist pawn or a crazed tyrant, bribes to turn the political class, and the orchestration of violent street protests to create the illusion of a popular uprising. The very same tactics that they use today against Iran. The first coup attempt failed, sending the Shah fleeing to Rome, but Roosevelt and his network persisted. They hid the coup's chosen military figure, General Zahedi, in a CIA safe house near the U.S. Embassy. On August 19th, their paid mobs took to the streets, tanks rolled, and the tide turned. Zahedi emerged from hiding to proclaim victory. Mossadegh was arrested. The Shah returned, his power now absolute and guaranteed by American guns and dollars. The CIA didn't just influence events, it stage managed them. For Iranians, 1953 created a foundational skepticism and a righteous anger that would fuel distrust of the West for generations. With the 1953 coup complete, the United States now had its man in Tehran. For the next quarter century, the US and the Shah were locked in a strategic embrace, transforming Iran into a critical Cold War asset. The relationship was transactional. In exchange for submission, the Shah received large amounts of US military aid, making Iran the region's most powerful force. In return, he acted as Washington's policeman in the Persian Gulf and a bulwark against Soviet expansion. Repression was the regime's foundation. The Shah relied on Savak, a feared secret police force trained by the CIA and Mossad to crush all dissent through torture, imprisonment, and disappearances. For Washington, it was a golden alliance: stability, oil access, and a reliable proxy. But on the streets, the tools of control, the secret police, imposed westernization, and the reality of being a client state were forging a deep, smoldering resentment. That resentment turned to outrage in 1964 with the Capitulations Law. Imposed by the US, it granted all American government employees as well as military personnel and their families in Iran full legal immunity, a surrender of judicial sovereignty that was seen as the ultimate national humiliation. The backlash was immediate. Imam Khomeini made fiery sermons against the agreement and was subsequently arrested and exiled. U.S. State Department analysts warned that his views were symptomatic of widespread popular opposition, and that this new anti-American sentiment made Washington's task far more difficult. American money, guns, and political support kept the Shah in power. His absolute power guaranteed American access to oil and a strategic foothold. Each cycle of support, each new weapons deal that imposed thousands of well-paid U.S. advisors with it, each endorsement of his repression further inflamed the public resentment. The relationship was thus built on a fundamental contradiction of empire. Washington imposed top-down social and economic reforms to create an obedient, modern, and stable client regime, while simultaneously fueling the Shah's insatiable appetite for expensive American weaponry. The pressure cooker exploded. On February 11, 1979, after many months of nationwide mass protests, strikes, and bloody crackdowns, the Shah's regime collapsed. Significantly, during the protests and the day after a major massacre in Tehran by the Shah's troops, an event named Black Friday by the revolutionaries, U.S. President Jimmy Carter called the Shah and gave him his full support, outraging Iranians. After a referendum, weeks after the regime's collapse, the Islamic Republic was born, founded on a core principle: absolute independence from foreign domination, especially American. On October 22, 1979, the Shah, who had murdered and tortured tens of thousands of Iranians, was given refuge by the U.S., even as the U.S. Embassy in Tehran was conspiring against Iran, as it had in 1953. 2 weeks later, a group of Iranian students, fearing another U.S.-backed coup like that of 1953, stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. After releasing the women and African Americans, they kept 52 American diplomats and Marines hostage for 444 days.
همینطور که می‌بینی دیگه. خب از لحاظ وضع سکونت، غذا، بهداشت
والا خوبه دیگه. چیکار کنیم؟ ما باید بسازیم.
نه خب مثلا کمبودی، اشکالی، نقیضه‌ای وجود داره میشه برطرف کرد.
نه از اون اشکالات که وجود نداره. اشکال کار فقط یکی اصلیه که
همین که اینجا هست.
همین که اینجا هستیم.
امیدواریم ان شاءالله که زمامداران مستبد عالم سر عقل بیان.
ان شاءالله.
مجرم ایرانی رو بدن، شما ان شاءالله با سلامت و راحتی برگردید و برید.
ان شاءالله.
For America, the images were a national trauma played out on nightly news. Blindfolded Americans and angry crowds chanting "Death to America," a slogan directed at Iran's tormentors, not ordinary Americans. President Carter's presidency was consumed by the crisis. A military rescue attempt, Operation Eagle Claw, ended in a desert sandstorm with crashed helicopters, a destroyed airplane, and dead servicemen, a symbol of imperial impotence. In Iran, the embassy was not seen as a diplomatic post, but as a den of espionage, the same command center from which the 1953 coup had been plotted. The students were adamant not to let history repeat itself. War erupted in September 1980. With U.S. encouragement, Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, aiming to crush the revolution in its cradle. Throughout the war, the U.S. and its allies provided Saddam with military support, vital intelligence, diplomatic cover, and chemical weapons. For 8 years, Iran fought a war of survival, witnessing the world's silence as Saddam's German chemical weapons rained down on its soldiers and cities. The message to Tehran was unequivocal. The U.S. and its Western allies would use any means to defeat the revolution. In May 1986, U.S. National Security Advisor McFarlane flew secretly into Tehran. His plane carried spare parts for Iran's Hawk anti-aircraft missiles as well as anti-tank missiles sold to Iran in return for its help in freeing U.S. captives in Lebanon. He also brought a Bible signed by President Reagan and a chocolate cake baked in the shape of a key, a symbol offering to unlock a new relationship. But the American plan was transactional. U.S. officials believed Iran's revolutionary government held unique influence over the multiple factions holding U.S. citizens in Lebanon, and that Iran's need for U.S. arms made it a willing partner. The goal? Trade weapons for hostages, using a shadowy network of international arms dealers as go-betweens. Unknown to the Iranians, the money used for these purchases was used to illegally fund the Contra rebels in Nicaragua.
یه دفعه ما متوجه شدیم در همین جریان به ما اطلاع دادن که یه هیئت آمریکایی آمده ایران با هواپیمایی که قبلا اجازه گرفته بود که از ایرلند برای ما قطعات بیاره که برای ما ابتداعا غیر قابل باور بود. تعجب ما بیشتر شد وقتی که گفتن که آقای مکفارلین هم در رأس این هیئت هستن. ما ابتداعا میخواستیم اونها رو نپذیریم و برگردانیم از فرودگاه. بعد فکر کردیم که چیزایی باید از اونها بفهمیم بعد که این سفر رو چرا انجام دادن.
Mistrust had already intensified before McFarlane's surprise trip, when in an earlier shipment in November 1985, Iranian officials identified Hebrew markings and Israeli serial numbers on 18 Hawk missiles. Those missiles were rejected because they were Israeli. Of course, these facts did not prevent Western-backed takfiris and other opponents of Iran and the resistance from myth-making about a supposed Iran-Israeli connection. In Tehran, the unannounced McFarlane expected a grand reception. Instead, he was met by mid-level interlocutors. Informed of the delegation's identity, Imam Khomeini issued a firm order: no senior officials, were to meet them. The trip was exposed in late 1986. For the Reagan administration, the McFarlane mission was a catastrophic humiliation that also exposed the entire Iran-Contra scandal. The U.S. proxy war against Iran subsequently intensified and reached its most tragic moment on July 3, 1988, when the USS Vincennes, a state-of-the-art U.S. warship, shot down Iran Air Flight 655. All 290 passengers were killed, including many women and children. The U.S. claimed it was a mistake, but in Iran, the official explanation was unacceptable. For many millions, this was no accident. A sophisticated warship in broad daylight shooting down a civilian airliner on its known flight path was inconceivable. Reagan later shamelessly awarded the Legion of Merit to the captain of the USS Vincennes. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, there was a moment of potential change. Iran, a victim of Al-Qaeda, publicly condemned the attack. At that time, Iran did not know that in Tel Aviv and Washington there were those with foreknowledge. Iranian diplomats provided intelligence for the U.S. response to the terror attacks. Many in Tehran mistakenly thought that the U.S. had learned a lesson from supporting Takfiri terror and that a window for change might have been opened.
States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil.
This was swiftly shattered on January 29, 2002. In his State of the Union address, President George W. Bush labeled Iran the key member of an axis of evil, alongside Saddam and North Korea. He painted Iran, the victim of decades of U.S. hegemony and antagonism, as the embodiment of evil. Following the revolution, the U.S. created a sanctions regime that gradually intensified. But under President Obama, it imposed maximum pressure sanctions, aimed, as Obama put it, at crippling an entire nation's economy. This wasn't just America banning its own trade. This was financial imperialism on a global scale. Through secondary sanctions, the U.S. threatened to cut off any bank, any shipping company, any oil buyer in the world from the U.S.-controlled financial system if they dealt with Iran. The impact on many vulnerable Iranians was very high. High inflation wiped out savings. A critical shortage of specialized medicines and aircraft parts led to many deaths. Western media claimed the sanctions were targeting the government, but they were clearly collective punishment. They imposed suffering to bring about societal collapse or capitulation.
We are reaching an agreement that is not perfect for anybody, but it is what we could accomplish, and it is an important achievement for all of us.
In 2015, after long negotiations involving the U.S., Iran, and 5 world powers, a nuclear deal was achieved. Of course, world powers is a dubious name for the UK, France, and Germany. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, was signed. Iran agreed to dismantle most of its centrifuges, ship out most of its enriched uranium, and open its facilities to the most intrusive international inspections ever devised. In return, the P5+1 countries would lift the crushing economic sanctions. The International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed repeatedly that Iran was in full compliance. Nevertheless, even as Obama praised the deal, his own administration immediately began to violate its core spirit. The JCPOA required the U.S. to actively facilitate Iran's reintegration into the global economy. Instead, the U.S. Treasury Department continued to threaten major fines on European banks for any transactions with Iran. Global corporations and financial institutions terrified of U.S. penalties, refused to do business with Iran, nullifying most of the economic relief that was the deal's foundation for Tehran. To Iran, this proved that America negotiated in bad faith, using diplomacy not for peace, but as another tool of warfare. The U.S. would sign an agreement, then use its unchallenged financial power to ensure the promised benefits never materialized. In 2018, Donald Trump unilaterally withdrew the United States from the nuclear deal. He reimposed and expanded U.S. sanctions, launching his own campaign of maximum pressure designed to cripple Iran's economy and force a wholesale renegotiation. The Iranian response was definitive. Ayatollah Khamenei banned all direct talks with the United States, calling engagement fruitless and harmful. After waiting a full year for the EU to fulfill its promise to resolve the issue, Iran began a step-by-step reduction of its own JCPOA commitments, restarting advanced centrifuges and enriching uranium to levels prohibited by the deal. Maximum pressure did not force Iran to accept Trump's demands. Instead, it accelerated the very nuclear advances the deal had halted. This cycle of escalation reached a bloody peak on January the 3rd, 2020, with the martyrdom of General Haj Qasem Soleimani, Iraqi commander Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, and 6 of their companions. General Soleimani was the architect of the war that crushed the ISIS caliphate. Under his command, Iranian-backed forces fought across the region to defeat ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other Western and regionally backed Takfiri terror groups. On the night of his martyrdom, he was traveling to Baghdad to discuss a secret Saudi peace overture with the Iraqi Prime Minister. The strike wasn't just revenge for the defeat of a U.S. and Israeli-led conspiracy against the region. It was also designed to block rapprochement between Tehran and Riyadh. In 2024, the newly elected President Pezeshkian signaled a new willingness to explore a path to resolve the nuclear issue. The goal was a balanced and honorable deal that would end the sanctions in exchange for verifiable nuclear limits. But the empire's gears were grinding towards deceit, murder, and aggression. As diplomats talked, the Trump and Netanyahu regimes were secretly conspiring. Their plan was regime change. They foolishly saw Iranian openness not as an opportunity for peace, but as a sign of weakness to be exploited. In the middle of negotiations, with U.S. support, Zionist forces launched a blitzkrieg assault designed to decapitate the Iranian state, shatter its military infrastructure, and inflict massive casualties on civilians. The message was as old as 1953. The U.S. does not negotiate with governments that value independence. It removes them. But the war did not break Iran. Instead, it weakened the Zionist regime and forged a new, harder national consensus. The attempt at a balanced and honorable resolution was replaced with a doctrine of enhanced resistance. So once again, this story returns to where it began. This is not a cycle of misunderstanding. It is the logic of empire, an empire that offers only 2 choices, subjugation or antagonism. The goal has never been partnership but control. And Iran's Islamic Revolution was built on the rejection of subjugation. See you next week.